Hey guys, CompSciGirl523 here, and we're back today with something a little bit different. So first, a quick update. I am making another map. It's going to be an SI file. I can't tell you the name yet as I haven't actually decided on a name. I'm kind of debating between two different ones at this point. I'll let you know as soon as I figure out myself which one I want to use. And yeah, so back to this video. So on a few different occasions, I have been asked if I would make any map making tutorials. So I decided, yeah, sure, I would do that. So my plan is to make a series of videos that basically explain whatever it is you want me to explain. So the only thing is, you need to keep in mind that anything I do explain is not the only way to do it. There are multiple versions of code and multiple ways people can do different things. Every map maker has their own sort of style when it comes to making maps. I'll be showing you from my perspective on how I plan out maps and how I plan out the code and everything. So, that being said, I need to know what you want to learn. So, do you want to learn how I program certain puzzles, how to do certain types of commands, how to write a story, etc.? Just leave your suggestions in the comments below. Now, since this is technically the first video in the series, I thought I would share with you my process for creating a map. Again, everybody has their own process, and what works for some may not work for others. Also, since this is just explaining a process, this video will be more presentation-like, whereas in future tutorials, it will be more in-game and hands-on. I'll be actually having the code in front of you, like the command block chains and etc. So that all being said, let's get started. First things first, when you're starting a map, you have to think about what type of map you want to make. There are several different types of maps. There's adventure, horror, finding, survival, puzzle, game, parkour, etc. Keep in mind that some of these maps actually can overlap with each other. For example, when I make adventure maps, my adventure maps contain puzzles and occasionally contain some parkour. My puzzle map that I made had a little bit of story, which is more common with adventure maps, but it also had parkour in there as a puzzle. So that's kind of like the first thing you want to do. After that comes the process. So for me, I have 7 steps that I follow when I make a map. Again, this is just my process. There's other processes that people use. I brainstorm, design, build, program, testing, final details, and completion. I'm going to go over each of these individually, briefly. So first we have brainstorming. To make a map, you need an idea. Usually for me, ideas come at the most random times. Usually when I'm eating. For example, when I came up with mastering the mind, I was actually eating lunch after a long morning of classes, and I was thinking kind of about oh, my brain does a lot of stuff. Well, that's an interesting concept, the brain. Okay, how can I turn that into a map? And hence we have mastering the mind. Usually what I end up doing is if I come up with an idea, I have a notepad document on my computer where I'll write down brief things about my idea. So I'll write down any actions I want to happen in the map, any characters that come to mind, any brief plot line, any themes, any other ideas that come to mind. I do this so that later on I can go back and see, okay, what's actually feasible, what's not. Speaking of design, we have designing next. So when you look closely, this is when you look closely at your idea. You want to see where you can actually go with your idea. So at this point, you want to start writing a script. Now, this is not a script in the actual sense where it's dialogue necessarily, unless you're doing an adventure map. A script could even be simply you writing down, for example, for a puzzle map, each of the puzzles, describe what the puzzle is, describe how the player is going to interact with that puzzle, etc., etc. And this is the time where if you do have characters, you want to add in, okay, these are the characters, this is the description of the characters, talk about locations that are going to be there. Locations are common across all maps. You need to have some sort of location for that map to be in. And then any other mechanics, such as puzzles, or do they need to use elytra, do they need to use redstone, etc., etc. After design comes building. Now, building itself is a process. And it's a process that's circular, meaning it repeats itself over and over and over and over again. When building, you're going to brainstorm, design, and build. In this case, brainstorming is thinking about, okay, how do I want this to look? How is this going to fit into place? How big of an area do I need? Designing is actually starting to maybe lay out a skeletal area where you have just squares on the ground saying this is going to be here, this is that going to be here, stuff like that. And finally building, and then you do that over and over and over again. You may redesign at some point. Maybe you're designing a building, you don't like how it looks, you redo it again. You do it over and over and over again. So this is a time when you need to start asking yourself a few questions. What is feasible? There are some limitations to what you can and can't do in Minecraft. So you have to think about, is it possible to have this structure built here, and will it actually fit here? And will it fit in with everything? Do I need to hide things? Are you going to have to put code in between floors? Are there lights that need to be wired with redstone, etc., etc.? What can a player see from here, particularly when it comes to windows? A player can see out windows. You want to make sure that they can't see anything they're not supposed to. How does player get to a location? Are we teleporting them around? Do they have to walk long distances? Are they going to be riding a minecart, a boat? Stuff like that. And what style builds you want? Particularly, it has to do usually with the theming. So if it's a medieval style, you're going to want to use like stone and wood. Versus if it's futuristic, you're going to want like more metallic looking things, etc., etc. So when building, you're going to want to have a world that's custom generated for you. So this can be either a void world, a super flat world, or a Pacific Seed that you look up online. Particularly, I usually do a modified version of a flat world. I add in 100 blocks of stone in between the bedrock and the top 3 layers of dirt. It's up to you. Depends on what style map you're doing. Also depends on how you like building your map. There are also a few game rules you want to keep in mind. The 2 that I most commonly use right away as soon as I get into a new world is changing the command block output to false so that I don't get the player found if I'm using a command block to test for something. Also, I keep my inventory true in case I'm building something, and if I'm testing something and I happen to be in survival when I test or adventure when I test it and something goes wrong, I still have my stuff. You may also want to do this just for building's sake. Set the daylight cycle to false so it's not constantly turning day and night while you're building. Turn the weather off so it doesn't start raining on you. And turn mob spawning off so that even if you're not even peaceful animals such as sheep and cows won't spawn in the middle of your builds. A couple more that you may want to do are, this is more for the programming side, but you can still do this during build time. Do mob looting false, meaning that mobs won't drop anything, entities won't drop anything for entities false, and tiles or blocks won't drop anything. These just reduce lag in general and prevent players from getting access to things they're not supposed to. You don't necessarily have to use all these rules. You could also set them true or false at a certain time and turn them back true or false later. That's up to you. And yeah, so couple tips I have. First things first, wait until programming to spawn characters and entities. When you're building, you're going to be making changes, and if you start spawning in villagers and skeletons or various other characters and other entities that you need, they have a tendency to get in your way if you're trying to do something. So I'd wait until you're programming to actually spawn them in. You can put down something to remind yourself that something goes there. For example, I usually put down like a piece of carpet, or I put a block saying this is where something's going to be, or I'll put a sign saying this is where a character is going to stand, etc., etc. This is the time also when you want to start working on custom textures. Start adding your custom textures as you need them. So this will take a little bit of time as you're going to have to go back and forth between turning the textures on and off, etc. But this is the time when you really want to get your custom textures working. And you do not have to fill up any chests yet. So usually when you want to make something look realistic, you have a few chests that may have miscellaneous items that aren't really pertaining to what the character actually needs in your story, or a person may not actually need it for their puzzle or whatever. Don't fill them up yet. That can be done in later detailing. As I stated before, building is a time when you may be rethinking things. For example, you may want to rethink your script. You may have thought, oh, I want to build this location, but then when you actually build it, it's not turning out how you want. You realize it's too small of a location that you build. So you want to think about, do I need to grow or shrink my map? Do I need to make things bigger? Do I need to make things smaller? Do I need to add a thing to the story to build off of why this looks this way, etc., etc.? You also want to think about utility space. I mentioned hiding command blocks in the floors. For example, This is a screenshot from Solve It Case 5. There was a block-and-a-half gap in between the floors that you couldn't see, where I was hiding command blocks for different chests you opened, for the doors that were locked. I had it so that they would unlock based upon if you had the key in your hand there, etc. So, after all that, you need to make sure of one thing. Back up your world. You do not want to lose any progress. Taken from me, it's very bad if you built something and all of a sudden, for some reason, it disappears. Please, please, please back up your world. Now, on to my favorite step. Programming! Okay. So, first and foremost, place your code at world spawn. I learned this later on after a couple of maps where I had to say what the render distance had to be in order for things to work. There's a way to solve that solution. Basically, place your code at world spawn. World spawn there's about, I believe if I remember correctly, is 16 chunks that remain always in memory no matter what. So if you place your code at world spawn, no matter where in the world you're building, it will always load whatever is happening there. Let's see. Programming is also a process. 4 steps. Brainstorm, design, build, and program. In this case, brainstorming and design involve the redstone circuits and the combination of the command blocks and laying out the actual command blocks. Building is actually placing those command blocks, and programming is the commands. Some programming tips. Back up your world often. If you are testing in your world especially, you're going to want to back up your world, because if something goes wrong, you do not want the file corrupted. It's preferable if you can test in another world, but if you really want to just test in your world because of some structure is needed for it, then make sure you back up your world right before you do that. So when you're coding, for me, I start from the top/bottom. What that means is I start from the top of the story, but the bottom of where my code's going to be. So not the newest code. The earliest code is at the bottom, and the later code is at the top. This is a time when you also spawn your characters and entities in, as I mentioned before. This is also when, if you have puzzles, I would build them when you get to them. Don't build them ahead of time, because sometimes they need to be reconfigured because of how the code runs. And test in between, like I said, sometimes if you have puzzles, things can be a little crazy. You want to test it right then and there versus waiting till everything else is built up around it, and then you're trying to change code in between other code, and it gets kind of messy. Preferably test in a test world unless you absolutely need the structure that you built for it, and if that's the case, make sure you back up your world right before you test it. Also, be flexible. Things are going to happen. You're going to have to change your code. It's not always going to work the first time through. It's okay. And also, take your time. I know you want to get things done. It's exciting. You're in the middle of programming, but you need to take your time. Otherwise, you're going to run into more problems later. That being said, after all that programming, it's time for testing. Now, first things first, prepare for bugs, not necessarily silverfish. Basically, testing is a time that you're going to run into bugs no matter what. It's inevitable. Mistypes happen when you're typing things out. You might misplace something. You might have read the coordinates wrong. It happens. You think a command is going to do A, but it ends up doing B because you forgot that they updated it or something. It happens. I don't know how many times I've had to rewrite pieces of code because I mistyped something. I misread something. It happens to everybody. Don't worry about it. Now, that being said, there is a bit of a process that I use for testing. So, first, I save a backup. Usually I save it to my desktop so it's easily accessible. Next, I do a full run through of the map no matter what. If it breaks, I fix it on the fly. I write down what broke, and I keep going. Usually I try to teleport between where I'm at and the code, and I write down the location in the code where the problem occurred. After that, I go back, reload up the backup, make fixes, save backup again, etc., etc. Basically, wash, rinse, repeat until you get all the major bugs out. I recommend then after you get all the major bugs out, you're able to play through without it breaking. Have somebody else play it if you can, because as a map maker, you know what's supposed to happen. You know where things are supposed to be. You know how puzzles are meant to be solved. It's the things that you don't think about that someone else may do that will end up breaking your map. So I'm lucky enough that I have 2 playtesters that do this for me. I really appreciate their help. So after testing, you have to add in your final details. So, like I said, go back and add the details. For example, filling in chests with random items. Just make sure if you have any chests that are rigged up with any like redstone or command blocks that you do not accidentally activate those. That being said, well, first set your game rule to send command feedback false. This prevents the block place from printing out in chat. Do one last check to make sure everything is reset. This is going back to the first one. You don't want to accidentally trigger something that wasn't meant to be triggered. Save a final backup, and do one final playthrough. This is the time where usually for me, I'll record when I do my final playthrough. It's also a good time to make sure you did actually reset everything, and if not, then you can go back and you play through it again just to make sure everything's reset. So those are the final detailings. And then lastly, upload your map. Now this can be done a couple different places. Personally, I upload to minecraftmaps.com. I know people upload to their Minecraft forums page. There's a few other websites out there that you can go to upload your map. And yeah, so that's basically my 7-step process. But there's one last thing. Have fun when you're doing this. Map making may seem a bit daunting at first, but it's extremely fun to do. If you have a cool idea for a map, don't be afraid to try to bring it to life. So yeah, that's basically my process for map making. So that all being said, back to the original premise of this video, I need to know what you want to learn. So leave your suggestions in the comments below, and I will check them out. I don't know when the first, well, technically second video will be out, but hopefully I'll get a lot of good suggestions. And yeah, so until next time, bye.